Hi! Welcome to this part of my review featuring the Wicked Ones role-playing game. If you haven't seen the other parts of this review, please check out the playlist in the description below. This is a role-playing game where the player characters play as the bad guys, as the dungeon dwellers, the kobolds, the zombies, the hobgoblins, the orcs and ogres. In this part of the review we are going to go through several things related to dungeons, such as the dungeon layout, the discoveries, dungeon defense, many things. So let's get started with the dungeon layout. There's a lot going on inside of dungeons, such as rooms, traps, tunnels, tricks, locks, and lairs. You and your minions build all of these during the lurking phase with downtime projects. You start off with a subterranean cavern or some other entrance from the overworld and branch out, adding on bit by bit as your dungeon extends deeper and deeper into the earth. So you have all the details concerning hidden or smaller passages, building rooms, crafting traps, tricks and locks, but there is a method to this madness. For example, when it comes to rooms and structures, they are the backbone of your dungeon, providing space to live, places to house tricks and traps. You have the different sections divided by tiers. Let's talk about Tier 1 rooms and structures. Here you will find things such as crawlways, long tunnels, minor rooms, secret tunnels, windows. On Tier 2 we have the guard post, minion lairs, prisons, torture chambers. And when it comes to Tier 3, each dungeon theme has a set of Tier 3 rooms that you can build, but you can also build a single Tier 3 room from another dungeon themes list with your dungeon's flexibility slot. Now concerning traps, they are static, well-hidden defenses that are meant to surprise and maim any unwary adventurer wandering your halls. Each trap consists of a mechanism which details what the trap does and a trigger which details what sets it off. The player in charge of the trap narrates the results of the trap roll. Trap rolls deal damage as if they were ticking a clock, with each tick doing half a heart of damage. You have details on the mechanism, which details how the trap is effective against invaders. You choose from some different mechanisms such as lightning arcs, crushing walls, spikes, boulders, pitfalls and such. When it comes to the trigger, this is how the trap is activated. Depending on the nature of the trigger, some adventurers might not even activate it, such as a levitating mage not setting off a pressure plate. There are different triggers to choose from, such as tripwires, magical detection, item removal, false doors. Traps are rated from Tier 1 to Tier 3, based on how deadly they are, and chosen by the player when it's crafted. A Tier 1 trap is somewhat easy to avoid, such as a doorknob trapped with a poison needle. When it comes to Tier 2 traps, they are deadly, like a giant swinging blade attached to a pressure plate. And Tier 3 traps are the deadliest, likely to affect multiple adventurers, like a tripwire that releases an enormous rolling stone ball. Of course, you had to have one of those. Now concerning tricks, they are subtle ways to get adventurers to do what you want or create advantageous situations for your dungeon. Each trick consists of a method, which details how it fools adventurers, a trigger detailing when it activates, and an intent which details what happens when it works. Tricks are rated from Tier 1 to Tier 3 based on how likely they are to work. Let me give you a few examples of these tricks. Maybe there is a string with metal pieces tied across it that jingles when kicked. This is a warning string. If you move past it, it alerts all minions to the presence of adventurers. Maybe there is a pool of water that fools adventurers into leaving heavy armor behind. So it's basically just a pool, the adventurers move through it, and they are now defenseless because they left their armor behind. Or maybe there is a winding maze that splits up the adventuring party, so they enter that place and now they are taken out one by one. Or perhaps there are moving lights from around a corner that make them snuff torches. So the adventurers enter the hallway and now they are in total darkness. A trick can never lead an adventurer into a situation they can't escape from. Once some time has passed, they finally overcome it somehow and move on. These types of tricks buy you time or an advantageous situation, but they are temporary. Remember that adventurers are incredibly crafty. A lot of you playing adventurers know this well. And even if they are stuck down a pit trap or chained to a wall, given a bit of time, they are likely to find a way out. Now concerning locks, they are used to buy time as well. They allow you to maneuver around your dungeon. That is, your evil player characters being masters of the dungeon, or they could beat a hasty retreat. Locks also serve to push adventurers away from sensitive areas. It's best to remember that locks won't keep adventurers out forever. Given enough time and determination, adventurers can push their way through any lock in front of them. Locks might also alert nearby minions, giving them time to set up ambushes or to keep sensitive areas safe. So maybe there are normal doors, double doors, metal bars that obstruct your path. Maybe there is some sort of barrier made of stone or of magic. Maybe it's a crystal barrier. There are all sorts of strange, magical and mundane locks. Locks are rated from tier 1 to tier 3 depending on how difficult it is to get through it, with players deciding the tier of the lock when building it. Now let's talk about the Sanctum. The Wicked Ones spend most of their time in the second level of the dungeon, called the Sanctum. You don't defend the first level. That's a job below you, meant for your minions, creatures and defenses. The denizens of your dungeon expect as much. They know that this is their role. For this reason, the Wicked Ones can't leave the Sanctum during the dungeon defense, as doing so would risk upsetting the dungeon hierarchy. Your Sanctum is a large room representing the heart of your dungeon. It houses the lion's share of your horde, and should reflect the style of leadership the player characters bring to the dungeon. At the end of your dungeon's first floor, there are stairs leading downwards towards your Sanctum. As your dungeon grows, you can reposition these stairs to the new end of your dungeon. You can do so during downtime, and it does not require a downtime action. A Sanctum is also quite the handy place to entertain and impress evil entities or conduct rituals. Let's talk about boss fights. The Sanctum's main purpose is to be the location of the boss fight, the titanic struggle waiting at the end of the dungeon for the adventurers. As they come down the stairway, you roll engagement to set up a scene. The Wicked Ones can't leave the Sanctum and can't interact with the first floor's dungeon defenses. Doing so would show immediate weakness to the minions, as stated earlier, and cause a revolt as your creatures try to wrestle leadership from you and establish their own dungeon hierarchy. Concerning private lairs, the player characters need a place to lay their head, but lairing near the other denizens of the dungeon would make you appear weak, of course. Each player character has their own private lair extending off of the Sanctum. When it comes to power struggles and raid plans, the Sanctum makes for a convenient location to set most scenes involving power struggles or raid planning. It's meant to be the power center of your dungeon. The more detail you put into it, the more interesting later boss fights become. Now let's talk about discoveries. As you dig into the earth, you're bound to run across other things underground, such as rivers, lakes, lava flows, remnants of old structures, and horrible creatures best left buried. When your dungeon tier increases, you make a discovery, as your imps find something underground, while they clear out space for your dungeon. The Game Master rolls to find out how beneficial it is for you. Discoveries may come at other times that the Game Master deems appropriate as well, such as after several new additions have been made to the dungeon, or as the result of a calamity. The exact nature of what you find is up to the Game Master, though they can roll on the table provided in this rulebook to set up the basic category. So maybe you find a liquid formation, a forgotten structure, some sort of creature, some magical object, or perhaps something related to fantasy science or weird science. And this is just generally speaking, there are more detailed tables. Discoveries are drawn by the Game Master and introduce randomness to the dungeon. They tend to come towards the end of your dungeon, extending it further into the deep. You can also discover hazards. They count as discoveries as well. A hazard is dangerous to both the dungeon denizens and any invaders. Let's talk about some of the discoveries that you can find. If you are successful when making discoveries, maybe you find the remnants of an old dungeon's sanctum with a small hoard. Everyone makes a 3D loot roll. Maybe you encounter a plain room with an entrance and 3 exits. Each exit teleports you to a different spot in the dungeon. Perhaps you encounter a cell containing an ancient imprisoned vampire who is willing to remain friendly if you let them go. But what if you obtained a mixed result when making such discoveries? Maybe you encounter a cavern with a very high ceiling that creates enormous echoing effects, shaking your dungeon. Maybe you find a lake with a large moving whirlpool, which teleports anyone sucked in to a random spot in the dungeon. Perhaps you encounter an old gnome farm, complete with artificial lighting that gives you a steady supply of carrots. Maybe you find a series of tunnels filled with cracked mirrors lining the walls, confusing anyone who enters. Now, when it comes to failure results in discoveries, perhaps you encounter a large hole in the wall, from which spews huge amounts of smoke, and the smoke drifts through your dungeon. Maybe you find an old storeroom with a barrel of explosive reagents, and this barrel explodes, destroying tunnels and dungeon walls. Maybe you find a magical statue of a forgotten god, which bloodies anyone of evil heart when they enter this room. Perhaps you find a health shrine, which replenishes a single adventurer heart per cycle. It's very volatile if destroyed. Or perhaps you discover a second entrance to your dungeon. It opens up in a terrible location. Now, in this book you also have a drawing guide. The dungeon serves as a maze for adventurers to get lost in. Drawing it out will help bring it to life and keep everyone on the same page while setting scenes inside of it. The dungeon is drawn out on the dungeon sheet, giving you an easy to use grid to work off while drawing it. Drawing the dungeon works best if everyone gets involved and takes turns drawing. You don't have to be an artist, of course, just drawing out simple squares and circles is enough. So you can draw your dungeon to be as basic or as detailed as you want it to be. It is supposed to be a fun experience, of course. You have different details and tips on how to draw better dungeons. For example, dungeon rooms tend to be geometric shapes, looking like someone built them. Most discoveries drawn by the game master and many creature lairs have a natural look to them, such as the walls of a cavern or an old structure that has partially collapsed. Creatures should be drawn on the map, of course. When drawing in the basic style, you should fill in the circle with the first letter of the creature to help remember what it is. And when you draw a trick, it's usually just best to draw a trigger or some symbol representing it. Arrows that indicate intent also help you remember them. And there are many tips and advice on how to accomplish this. All sorts of icons, examples of styles, examples of rooms and corridors, tricks, traps, creatures, everything. A very complete guide. Now let's move on to dungeon defense. You've raided the overworld for its riches. Use the horde you've amassed to attract minions, build locks and traps to withstand invasion. And now it's time to put it all to the test and keep those pesky adventurers away from your gold. Invasions usually occur due to bad blowback or calamity rolls, as your actions in the overworld bring adventurers down upon you, or problems within your dungeon alert them to your presence. Sometimes events in the story might dictate an invasion is occurring, such as a faction clock filling or you giving away your dungeon's location to known enemies. Dungeons are in hidden, isolated or wild areas. The exact location of your dungeon is usually unknown to those on the surface. Most adventurers that wander into your halls are just following some rumors of monster activity in the area and head out in hopes of finding it and ridding the world of your evil. Now, concerning the invasion itself, when invaders enter your dungeon, they are usually adventurers, of course. Each adventurer has hearts that represent their willingness or ability to push forward. Dungeon defenses roll to damage these hearts, wearing away at the resolve or health of the invaders. Adventurers are incredibly strong foes, and when grouped, the only way to stop them is to send them through the gauntlet that is your dungeon's defenses. And logically, adventurers might use their moves to disable or resist dungeon defenses. Sometimes adventurers will bring along hirelings to pad their numbers, and there are different types of invasions. A minor invasion happens as a result of minor blowback or calamity. It's an invasion that your dungeon is likely to be able to take care of easily. A major invasion is an existential threat to your dungeon and happens as a result of major blowback or calamity. A powerful group of adventurers, usually equal in number to the player characters, come into your dungeon looking to rid the world of your foul presence. Every major invasion is tougher than the last. Most invasions consist of 3 to 5 adventurers, usually the same number as there are player characters, with the exceptions stated earlier. The Game Master can send more adventurers for a harder invasion, or swap out adventurers for hirelings to make it a little lighter, a little bit easier. Adventurers can also be of different tiers. When an invasion occurs, the Game Master selects some adventurers from the Game Master chapter to send against the player characters. These adventurers might be connected to previous factions that you've tangled with, but also might just be randomly questing in your area and stumble upon your dungeon. And certainly there is information in this book for the Game Master to create his or her own adventurers. Now let's talk about starting locations. When an invasion occurs, the Wicked Ones are always located in the Sanctum, where they await the adventurers for the final boss battle. Wicked Ones can't leave the Sanctum during dungeon defense because of the circumstances detailed earlier, and depending on your initial roll during the encounter, during the boss fight, a success starts you off in a good position. A mixed result starts you off in a less than ideal situation, and a failure starts you off in a terrible position. And concerning minion awareness, dungeons are strange places, and sounds travel in odd ways. Uneven cave walls cause strange echoes, or even absorb sound. Smoother walls send sounds funneling down hallways. But it can be next to impossible to discern where the sounds came from. Doors might even block out sounds entirely, and there could be some other factors such as streams or lava flows creating noise. Monsters tend to be a noisy bunch, filling the dungeons with the sounds of their work, revelry, bickering, and fighting. Sudden, violent clashes between dungeon denizens are commonplace as well. On top of this, adventurers usually try to move quietly, knowing the danger of alerting their enemies. Once your minions are alerted, however, you're free to act with them as you wish. So minions can't act on player knowledge, they need to become aware of the invaders. There are also details on pathing. The Game Master controls the movement of the invaders through the dungeon. Generally, they enter through the dungeon's entrance and work their way through the dungeon towards the Sanctum. However, invaders may have other motivations or come in through other means. They could be making their own entrances through magical or mundane means. As the invaders move through the dungeon, the Game Master narrates their movements. The invaders should feel skilled and their progress invasive. And this leads us to dungeon defense narration. The players are responsible for rolling for and narrating the dungeon's defenses, keeping in mind how the Game Master has narrated the adventurers moving through the dungeon. In this way, the dungeon feels like it belongs to you, not the Game Master. It's your home that you've put in the effort to build, so enjoy telling the story of how the defenses play out. And when it comes to the Sanctum battle itself, when the adventurers reach the stairway down, they prepare to push on and face their final battle versus the Wicked Ones. They know a big fight is coming, and they head down the stairway prepared. But are the Wicked Ones ready for them? Engaged in their own nefarious doings, do they even know what has happened in the level above them? The Game Master rolls engagement as soon as the adventurers reach the stairway. The engagement roll depends on how quickly the adventurers pushed through the dungeon. If the adventurers take too long, it means a better engagement roll for the Wicked Ones. The engagement roll sets the stage for the battle in the Sanctum, determining the initial position of the player characters as explained earlier. Now let's talk about looting the bodies. Once you manage to stave off the invasion, fighting them off in the Sanctum if it's necessary, it's time to rifle through the adventurers' possessions, dispose of the bodies, or deal with any prisoners. Depending on how an adventurer lost their last heart, you might be able to take them as a prisoner, though this usually requires a bit of forethought on the part of the players. If an invasion occurred as the result of blowback, you add the loot dice from the invasion to your loot from the raiding phase. If it was the result of calamity, you instead make a second loot roll. Now concerning destruction, sometimes you don't make it through. Perhaps the adventurers busted in your front door, smashed through your defenses, left your bodies littered around your sanctum, and made off with your horde. So how do you move on from this? Maybe you don't, that could be the end of the game. Dungeons have a way of finding themselves cleaned out. That's what adventurers do after all. Part of the fun of building a dungeon is knowing the end is coming, and seeing how long you can live in spite of that. Hopefully, your Wicked Ones could be able to triumph against all adversity. Now I am going to give you an example of a typical dungeon situation. This scenario example is called Kill the Trespassers. Having braved the twisted landscape surrounding the player character's enclave dungeon, a monk, a Templar, and an Inquisitor descend inside, looking to retrieve the Abbey's missing books and put an end to the evil emanating from the forest. The Game Master speaks. Crag, your minions died on the last raid, so we don't need a roll from you. Slem, Ulrot, make a starting location roll for your minions. Ulrot, the Orc Brute, speaks.
I don't need to roll either. My Orc Raiders start out in the guard post.
Slem rolls a die to determine the starting location and gets a success. Slem, the Slissic Shadow, speaks.
My goblin thieves were near the entrance and hear the adventurers coming, so they rush back down the hallway past the patrol trick. They'll wait in ambush and hope it goes off.
The Game Master speaks. Sounds good. Okay, these three come creeping into your dungeon. The monk's face is all scratched up from the thorns in the forest. They are hit by the earthy, mossy smell of the floors and walls as the firefly lamps cast dim yellow light through the halls. The Templar accidentally steps on a mushroom imp, squishing it, sending the other imps fleeing in panic. Crag, let's see how the trap in this room goes. Crag rolls one die for the trap, which is magical detection gas, and gets a success. Crag, the kobold shaman, speaks.
The dead, hollowed-out tree on the far end of the room opens its eyes and spots the monk stumbling away as the mushroom imps run around their feet. With a groan, the tree opens its maw and spews poisonous fungal gases, catching the monk in the cloud, and I roll again.
Crag rolls 1d for the trap again and gets a mixed result. The Game Master speaks. The Inquisitor sees the tree moving and jumps to push the monk out of the way, getting caught by the fumes as well. That's 2 slashes for the monk and 1 for the Inquisitor. Its poisonous gases spent, the tree just glares at the adventurers as they move on. Do you want them to go down the hallway, or do you want them to go through the cave tunnel? Ulrot, the Orc Brute, speaks.
Definitely through the cave, towards the gators.
The Game Master rolls 1d of pathfinding and gets a mixed result. The Game Master speaks. Cool, they enter the cave tunnel. The fetid water on the floor slowly gets deeper as the tunnel expands into the gator's lair. Ulrot rolls 1d for the creature, which is sneaky and powerful, and gets a failure. Ulrot speaks.
The gators make their move, slowly sneaking up behind the Inquisitor, but she knows they're coming and turns around quickly, confusing them. The Templar steps in from the side and crushes one of their skulls with his mace, which sends the other one running away.
The Game Master speaks. Alright, the adventurers make it to the other side of the cave. Sitting on land, they dry off. Slim, this activates the patrol trick now. It's a tier 2 trick, but this Inquisitor's passive is that she's really good at figuring out tricks. Let's reduce that to a tier 1. Slim rolls 1 die of trick, patrol snuff torches, and gets a success. Slim speaks.
Only needed one, so the adventurers spot some light moving towards them from around the corner. The monk tosses his torch into the water to keep from being seen. The adventurers can't see it, but the patrol is just some mushroom imps carrying a big jar of fireflies.
The Game Master speaks. As the imps disappear down another hallway, the Templar signals to move into the dark hallway. Where are your goblin thieves at? Slim speaks.
They are hiding behind some rocks just outside the cave. They toss the mushroom imps a thumbs up, then wait as the adventurers pass. They hit them from behind. I'm gonna spend their morale here too. Can I target the monk? He's hurting the most.
The Game Master speaks. Yeah, I don't see why not. The goblins don't really know he's hurting, but you can always act on knowledge the player has. These goblins are perfectly set up for the first strike, dominant position. Slim rolls 3D for Skulk and gets a critical. Slim speaks.
The monk was the last one into the hallway. He only has a heart and a half left, and can't use a move to resist this, because it's a crit. So he's dead. One of the goblins climbs up and wraps some rope around his throat, while the other two pin-cushion him with daggers. For the bonus from the crit, can the other two adventurers not even notice he's gone?
And that concludes this part of the review. As you can see, this dungeon section of the book is highly detailed, and I also think that it's going to be quite useful for other role-playing games. Any role-playing games that have dungeons and lairs, the way that you can generate discoveries, the tips for mapping out the dungeon, many other considerations concerning locks, traps, tricks and such. It's a very nice, very useful section overall. It is definitely one of my favorite sections of this book. I hope you will watch the next part, because we are moving on to Cycle of Play, with many details concerning lurking, calamity, raiding, blowback, etc. Thanks for watching this part of the review, and thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.